That night, right at the dinner table of the very house I had built with my own hands, my son-in-law pointed his finger at my face and said in front of my daughter, "Do as I say, or get out of this house." And what hurt more than his words was the moment my daughter nodded. After 30 years as an engineer, I thought I understood everything about pressure, boundaries, and the weight of silence. But I was wrong. Only when I was thrown out of the very house I had built did I realize the cruelest thing was not betrayal itself. But when the betrayer truly believes, "You will never fight back," I did not shout. I simply picked up my suitcase and left in the night. But they did not know. Every brick, every paper, every signature in that house still bore my name. And with one well-timed signature, their entire empire of deceit would crumble in broad daylight. This is not the story of an old man being cast into the street. It is the journey of a father, turning humiliation into justice and using silence to teach the world respect. If you have ever been looked down on by your own family, if you have ever chosen silence because you believe justice does not need to scream to be heard, leave a single dot in the comments so I know you still believe in truth. And subscribe, because I have many more stories to tell, where those pushed to the edge rise again, not with fists, but with a document, a verdict, and a gaze that never bows. That night, the 3-story wooden villa by Hollow Creek glowed like a lonely lantern in the woods. I designed the house myself. Every beam and stair was measured, sawed, and raised by my own hands. After 30 years as an environmental engineer, I dreamed of a quiet place to retire, to plant native trees and listen to water running through the valley. But that night, everything I had built with love turned into a battlefield. Elise, my daughter, sat silently to my right. Brandon, her husband, faced me with a triumphant look. The smell of grilled salmon filled the room, yet no one could taste it. I asked about the eco-resort contract in Sun River, the project I had guaranteed with my 30-year reputation. $120,000. My name used so he could get a job, so they could pay their debts, so my daughter would stop struggling. Brandon smirked. "Oh, that contract's sweet. Finally, the old man did something useful." I froze, not because of the words, but because of the tone. He spoke as if I were his employee, not the man who had saved his career from ashes. Elise whispered, "Don't say that, honey." Brandon didn't even turn. He shrugged and lifted his glass. "I'm just complimenting your dad." The air thickened. I wanted to believe it was a joke, but there was no trace of regret in his eyes. I stayed calm. "Brandon, you know this house, this land. Every stone was built by me. I just want you both to respect that." He set the glass down. The sound of crystal hitting wood was sharp and dry. "You're right. This was your house. Was. Now it's my family's place. If you want to keep living here, then—" He paused, staring straight into my eyes, his lips curling. "Do as I say, or get out." I thought I misheard. Elise dropped her fork, hands trembling. I looked at her, waiting for a single protest, one sentence, just one, "Don't, honey." But no. She lowered her head. Then slowly she nodded. That nod felt like a hand squeezing my heart. 30 years ago, I had stayed up nights drafting the blueprint for this house so my daughter could grow up safely. I remembered her at 6, sitting on my shoulders at the construction site, pointing at the frame and laughing, "Daddy, this is our castle." And now the child who once called me her hero nodded to the man who had just thrown me out of our castle. I took a breath. "Elise, do you know what you're doing?" She bit her lip, said nothing. Brandon scoffed. "Don't make her feel guilty. We're all tired of you. You live here, but meddle with everything. Repairs, decisions. You're retired. Relax. What happens in this house, I decide." My voice was low. "And you, Elise?" She didn't lift her head. She whispered, "I think he's right." That was when I knew I hadn't just lost my home. I had lost my daughter's respect. I laid my napkin down neatly. "All right, I'll go." Brandon leaned back, smirking. "Good. I like people who know their place. I glanced around the table, the same table still bearing the dark burn mark from the candle Elise had spilled on her 7th birthday. I once told her, "It's okay. Let it stay so you'll remember. This is your home." Now I knew some burns never fade. I stood up. Elise rose too, wanting to speak, but Brandon blocked her. "Let him go. Let him finish his act." I didn't look back. Upstairs, I opened the closet, took my old leather suitcase. Inside were a few clothes, my notebook, house deeds, and a USB drive containing the Sun River contract, the same one Brandon had used my name to secure. My signature sat above his, crooked and crude, but enough to turn gratitude into chains. When I came downstairs, Brandon was still there, beer in hand, feet on the coffee table. He didn't even glance at me. Elise stood by the doorframe, eyes red, lips sealed, and my 3-year-old granddaughter, Emily, ran up and hugged my leg. "Where are you going, Grandpa?" Her little voice rang like a glass bell across the hardwood floor. I knelt and held her tight. Her small body was warm and smelled of soap. For that moment, everything went still. The TV, the wind, even my own racing heart. Only her soft breathing against my collar. "Just away for a while, sweetheart." I stroked her hair, fine as silk, glinting under the light. I spoke softly, afraid a louder word would break the dam behind my eyes. "Want to take my toy with you?" she asked, holding out her frayed cloth doll with one loose arm. "I bought it for $12 at the Ben Fair last year. She named it Lily and slept with it every night." She extended it toward me, tiny hands trembling, afraid I wouldn't take it. "So you won't be lonely, Grandpa. Take Lily and think of me." I bent down, taking her hands in mine. "You keep her, sweetheart. When I come back, I want to see Lily here, waiting on your bed for me, okay?" She bit her lip and nodded. "But you have to promise. Not too long." "Promise, Grandpa." I smiled through the sting in my eyes. "I promise. I just need to tidy some things up so our home can shine again. When I return, you'll see. It'll be beautiful." She wrapped her arms around my neck, squeezing so tightly I thought my heart would burst. "I love you, Grandpa." I swallowed hard. "I love you too. More than this house. More than the lake outside." When I stood, she still clung to my sleeve, her eyes begging time to stop. I gently loosened her grip, afraid to tear something fragile. As the door closed, I still heard her call out, "Come back soon, Grandpa." I didn't turn around, because if I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to leave. Elise turned away. Brandon turned up the TV. The sports commentary drowned out everything. I opened the door. The cold air from the lake cut across my neck like a blade. The hallway light threw my shadow long across the floor. A man who had lived his life for family, now leaving like a stranger. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, leaving behind a half-finished dinner and people who no longer knew shame. My truck waded down the misty slope. As the engine started, I looked through the rearview mirror, the house still glowing. Inside that light, Brandon's shadow stood tall, like a man on a stolen throne. I whispered, "Enjoy it. Tonight's the last night you'll sit there without trembling." I left Hollow Creek Villa not because I was driven out, but because I knew, to reclaim justice, sometimes you have to walk away before you strike. That was the night I learned. People can only humiliate you once, if you let them. And I had just decided I would never let them again. The road down from Hollow Creek was steep and winding. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the black pines on either side of the road. I drove slowly, my hands still trembling lightly on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, the lights from the villa were still a warm yellow, one stubborn glow clinging to me even as I drove away. With every yard, I heard the echoes of that evening. Brandon's voice, the sound of a fork hitting the table, Elisa's nod, and the last warm embrace of small hands around my neck. "Where are you going, Grandpa?" Emily's voice still rang in my ears. That scene replayed in my head in frames. She had held out the doll Lily and told me to take it so you won't be lonely. I remembered the feeling of holding her tiny hand, warm, soft, and faintly trembling. I had said, "You don't need to, sweetheart. When I come back, I want to see Lily still here." Now, thinking back, I realized those words kept me steady. I did not want my granddaughter to remember me as someone who ran away. I wanted her to see the day I returned with my honor intact. Around midnight, I reached the old mill district, a quiet riverside residential area by the Deschutes. I pulled into a newly built apartment building. The hallway lights were still on. A night manager opened the door, her voice gentle. "Do you need to rent a room?" "I need a place to stay tonight." She flipped through the book and found, "Room 3B is available. $2,100 per month, plus a $2,500 deposit." I nodded and took out my checkbook to sign. My hands still smelled faintly of pine from the old suitcase. She asked, "Are you planning to stay long?" "I'll only stay here until I get my house back." Room 3B was small, white, and cold. I turned on the light and set down the suitcase. The paint still smelled new. There were no children's sounds, no lake water, only the slow ticking of a clock. I opened the window. The river wind came in bitter and cold, carrying the scent of moss and metal. Far off, I could still see a muted band of light on the ridge, where Hollow Creek Villa sat. I sat in a chair and opened my file bag. The deed still lay neatly. Richard Marin, sole owner. Beneath that line were the years I had lived, worked, and loved. I read each paper. Tax bills, insurance, and loans paid off. All in my name. Not a single line bore Brandon's name. And yet tonight he told me to do as I say or get out. I opened my laptop and went back to the folder, labeled Hollow Creek 2000. Inside were dozens of old photos. Me on the roof, Elise running around the yard with paint on her cheek, the carved wooden sign reading Hollow Creek Villa, still pristine. I remembered that morning when I said, "One day you'll live here, and this house will be yours." Elise had hugged me from behind and laughed. The promise, "Oh, I won't let anyone touch it," now rang like a curse. I poured a small glass of liquor and looked out the window. Moonlight skated across the river in blotches. Everything around me was quiet. Only my heart was unsettled. The initial sting had cooled and been replaced by a cold clarity. I did not feel like someone who had been driven out. I felt like someone stepping back to study an opponent. In my old work, when repairing a cracked dam, I always stepped back to see the whole picture and find the weak point. This time was no different. I took out my notebook and opened the first blank page. My handwriting trembled, but the first line was clear. Day 1. I leave not to run, but to prepare my return. I set the pen down and looked around the empty room. No dining table, no armchair, only a single bed. I did not feel lonely. I felt focused. I no longer lived in someone else's house, forced to be silent for fear of hurting my daughter. Outside, the river wind whistled through the crack of the door. I closed my eyes and heard it as a whispered oath. On that first night away from home, I could not sleep. But for the first time in years, I did not feel old. I felt like I was beginning again, as the engineer who believed that with the right calculations, anything could be rebuilt stronger than before. I whispered into the dark, "Brandon, do you think I left because I'm weak?" "No, I left so you forget that I know how to build, and I also know how to dismantle." Outside the window, the moonlight on the Deschutes glittered like 1,000 tiny mirrors. I knew that when morning came, the man who had been the humbled father would vanish. Only a man preparing to reclaim justice would remain. And that night, in that empty room, I chose my path. Not retreat, but the beginning of a silent counterattack. The first morning in the Old Mill District apartment, I woke up as sunlight passed through the white curtains, painting uneven patterns on the wall. The air still smelled of fresh paint, cold and synthetic, so unlike the warm pine scent of Hollow Creek Villa. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at the table, and opened my leather file bag. Every document I had carried that night was still there, thick, heavy, and cold as steel. I pulled them out one by one. The property deed, Richard Marin, sole owner. Beneath my signature was the notarization date, November of 2000. I remembered that afternoon clearly. After signing, I had driven straight to the lake and handed it to Elise. She jumped up and cheered, "Dad, that means the house really belongs to you now?" I smiled and patted her head. "It belongs to me, and one day it will belong to you." I never knew that promise would one day cut into me like a blade. I continued reviewing each bill, property tax, insurance fees, roof repair permits, maintenance invoices, all paid by me. Every small line on those pages reflected the years I had spent protecting that place. Every number was proof that I wasn't insane, senile, or confused, as Brandon had implied. I was only betrayed by the very person I thought would understand the value of that home more than anyone. My phone buzzed. The screen showed Elise's name. I stared for a long while before opening the message. "Dad, I know Brandon went too far, but please give us more time. Things will get better." I read it over and over. Every word was salt in an open wound. Give us more time. Time for what? For me to grow old in a rented apartment while they lived in my house, ate at my table, used the insurance I had paid for, and raised my granddaughter to call someone else the man of the family? I clenched the phone but didn't reply. I set it down next to the property deed. From a father, I suddenly felt like an outsider, watching strangers act out a play. I took a deep breath and turned on the printer. The mechanical hum filled the room. Page after page. The property deed, tax statements, roof invoices, insurance contracts, the building permit from 2000, photos of the house from foundation to finish. I stacked them neatly like an engineer laying out blueprints for a new structure. But this time, the structure wasn't a house. It was a legal plan to reclaim dignity. Looking at the papers aligned in rows, I remembered something I once told my interns. When a structure collapses, don't rebuild right away. Find out why it fell. My house didn't fall because of weak soil. It fell because of rotten hearts. I held the deed up to the light. Beneath the notary seal, one line stood clear. Property not under joint ownership. I laughed, dry but burning. Why should I have to leave my own home? The question escaped, small but heavy as a hammer on my chest. Why should I bear humiliation while they lived comfortably? Why should a man who spent his life building, paying taxes, and protecting the environment be called a bothersome old man? I pushed the pile aside, opened my laptop, and typed, "Real estate attorney, Bend, Oregon." Dozens of results appeared. I read through each name, each review. Then I stopped at one familiar name. Liana Ortega, attorney at law. The photo showed a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm smile. I remembered her. Years ago, Liana was a student in my environmental impact assessment class. Now she was a lawyer specializing in property and ownership disputes. I called. A warm, steady female voice answered, "Ortega Law Office, this is Liana. This is Richard Marin. Do you remember me?" A pause, then a soft laugh. "Professor Marin? I heard you retired. What's going on?" I hesitated, then said plainly, "I need to take back my house, not to live in it, but to defend the truth." Liana didn't ask more. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, my office by the Deschutes River. Bring every document you have." "Thank you. I'm not helping out of respect," she said firmly. "I'm helping because injustice inside a family is what weakens people fastest. I hate that." After the call, I sat still for a long time. Outside, the sun had fully risen, light flooding the table. The pile of papers before me gleamed like metal. I gathered them, placed them in the folder, careful as if preparing blueprints for my first hydroelectric dam. Last night, I lost my home. This morning, I found my reason to fight. On the folder's cover, I wrote the label, Hollow Creek, recovery plan. The last word I pressed darker. Plan. Because this time I wasn't building a house. I was building justice. The next morning, the Deschutes River gleamed under the first winter sun. The water lay flat, like glass, reflecting the maples shedding their last leaves. I parked by the riverside and looked at the small sign in front of each a white-painted wooden building, Ortega Law Office. The sign was simple, but the glass door reflected the blue sky and made the place look solid as a promise. Inside, the room was softly lit, the smell of coffee and new wood blending. Black and white photos of Old Bend hung on the wall, and on a desk corner a Juris Doctor, framed in oak, bore the name Liana Ortega. When I stepped in, she looked up and smiled slightly, still that same calm, sharp gaze she had as my student at the University of Oregon 20 years ago. "Professor Marin," she said, her voice light but steady, "I never thought I'd see the day you'd be sitting on this side of the desk." I nodded and set my thick file on the glass table. "Life turns fast, Liana. Now I'm the one who needs a lesson in justice." She opened the file and flipped through each page, her eyes moving quickly and precisely. Every document I had brought, from the deed to the tax bills to the building permits, she marked with a gold pen. "You kept your records very well," she said. "That helps. It will make protecting you easier." I was silent. Outside the window, the Deschutes flowed by. A pair of ducks skimmed the surface, leaving ripples that faded as quickly as my anger. Liana pushed the file toward me. "You are still the legal owner of the house. They are on no document. Brandon Cole is just a lodger. Under Oregon law, you have the full right to reclaim possession at any time." I leaned back in my chair, my voice hoarse. "But what if they refuse to leave?" "We'll start with a 30-day notice, an official demand to vacate. If they don't leave after 30 days, I'll file for forcible entry and detain her in court. Then the court will schedule a hearing within 60 to 90 days. No one stands above the law." I nodded. She pulled a legal services retainer from her desk drawer and skimmed it. "The retainer fee is $4,000. You can pay by check." I took out my checkbook and signed slowly. The blue ink spread across the paper, steady and unrattled. When I was young, my hand shook over big designs, afraid to make a mistake. Now it was steadier than ever, because this time I was not drawing a house. I was signing for my own justice. I pushed the check across the table. "Take it. I'm not paying to win. I'm paying so the truth can stand up." Liana smiled softly, the smile of someone who understood loss. "You still speak like you did in class. Short, but heavy." I asked, "How do you think they'll react?" She closed the file and looked me straight in the eye. "They'll cry, apologize, blame you, beg, and threaten. They'll say, 'You're cruel.' But remember this, justice does not tremble because of tears. And I always tell my clients, when a family starts to cry, do not back down." I looked at the river, the light flashing on the water blinding my eyes. I said slowly and firmly, "They already cried. They cried at the wrong person." The room fell quiet. Wind rustled the window frame, bringing a chill. Liana studied me for a long moment, then gave a small smile, part surprise, part respect, as if a teacher had come back to class and was now the one studying the hardest lesson of his life. She said softly, with both wonder and respect, "You are no longer the gentleman at the drafting table. You have been made of steel." I answered without smiling. Steel was once soft ore. People only change after they have been heated enough. We stood, and she reached out for my hand, a firm, lingering handshake. Through the glass, the river glittered in the sun, and in that moment I felt an odd calm, as if justice had begun to take shape. Before I left, I looked back at Liana. "Thank you. Today you're more than my lawyer." She smiled. "Then prepare yourself, because starting tomorrow, we won't be the people who were driven out of their home. We'll be the owners reclaiming their ground." I stepped out onto the porch. The Deschutes breeze hit my face. The river still ran slowly, but I knew that under that calm surface there was an unstoppable force, and so was I. I had once built dams. Now I knew exactly which valves to open to make others drown. 3 days after meeting with Liana, the small apartment by the Deschutes had turned into a full-fledged war room. On the table, I spread out every document: taxes, bills, receipts, bank statements. The laptop was open to Excel, each blank cell like a map of my past. I typed the first row: date, expense type, amount, notes, attached evidence. The meticulous work brought an odd calm. Each line of data was a fragment of memory, and I forced it to have numbers, proof, no longer emotion. I typed: property tax 2021, $6,200. Home insurance premium, $1,950 per year. Roof repair 2022, $8,700. Average monthly maintenance and utilities, $480. I worked for 3 hours straight. When finished, the Excel sheet ran nearly 8 pages. Over the past 3 years, I had spent $94,600, while the Brandon's contribution column was empty. A cold zero among real numbers, the zero of ingratitude. I sent the file to Liana with a note. This isn't just spending, it's the record of how kindness was exploited. Less than an hour later, she called. Her voice came clear through the phone. Professor, I pulled the public record on Brandon Cole. The results aren't good for him. I asked, how bad? 4 civil judgments between 2021 and 2024. Total debt is $32,000. 2 credit card suits, 1 bank debt, and 1 labor contract breach, all listed in public liens. I was silent. Outside, rain began tapping the glass, each drop a ticking clock. She continued, someone like him won't leave willingly. Hollow Creek Villa is the only thing he has left to cling to. I said quietly, I know. That's why I have to cut him off. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Elise. A picture of Emily smiling, holding a crayon drawing. 3 circles for 3 people. Me, Mommy, and Grandpa. Beneath it, a small line. I miss you. I stared at it for a long time. My eyes burned, but my heart was steady. I couldn't let emotion be weaponized again. I typed back just 3 words. Grandpa loves you. Nothing more. No door left open for anyone else to walk into my trust. The next day, Liana called again. Professor, the 30-day notice has been delivered. Brandon and Elise signed the postal receipt this afternoon. I said only, thank you. That evening, I took my laptop to a small cafe by the foggy riverbank. As I sat, the phone began to buzz. 1 call, then 2, then 10, then dozens. Elise's name, then Brandon's, then numbers. I didn't know. I set the phone face down. 5 minutes. 10. 20. I didn't answer. I just watched the clock and counted. By 8 p.m., the screen showed 99 missed calls. I scrolled through the list, seeing voicemail icons I wouldn't open. The glowing screen in the dark looked like a pile of ashes from all the years I'd trusted. Then I laughed, not from joy, but from something sharper, cleaner. I whispered hoarsely to myself, finally, it's their turn to lose sleep. I sipped the cold coffee, watching rain cascade down the glass. The droplets merge into a murky stream, like my own emotions, no longer clear or clouded, only resolute. That night, for the first time since being thrown out, I smiled, not out of triumph, but as a man watching the ones who humiliated him finally begin to tremble. And I knew this was only the beginning of justice. 2 days after the 30-day notice was sent, I received a message from Brandon. We need to talk. Just 15 minutes, in public, for Emily. I didn't reply immediately. I forwarded the message to Liana. She called back in less than 5 minutes. You should avoid confrontation, she said. But if you want to look that man in the eye to measure him, choose a public place with witnesses. Record everything. I nodded. I can control myself. We agreed to meet at the Mill Cafe. the one in the center of the old mill district, with a view straight across the Deschutes. The place was busy, voices blending with the smell of roasted coffee. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a seat near the window, back against the wall. Old habit of an engineer. Always keep an open view. Never let someone stand behind you unnoticed. Brandon came with Elise. He wore a suit and tie, the look of someone pretending to be composed. Elise walked beside him, face pale, eyes swollen. When she saw me, she paused for a second, but I forced a polite smile. "You still like to show up early, huh?" I said nothing. Brandon pulled out a chair and sat down. Elise sat opposite, gripping her coat tightly. I spoke first. "Say what you came to say." Brandon gave a small smile, half pleading, half bargaining. "You're making this bigger than it has to be. We can work something out. If you withdraw the claim, I promise we'll move out in 6 months. Emily needs stability. You don't want to hurt her, do you?" I looked at him calmly. 6 months for you to keep living off someone else? I gave you 3 years of stability. It's time you stood on your own. His expression hardened. His tone shifted. Lower. Sharper. "Listen, old man. You might have lawyers and papers, but I've got something you don't. I have Emily. If you don't stop this, you'll never see her again. She'll grow up never remembering you. I'll tell her you walked away, that you didn't care about family." I didn't move. The coffee in front of me still steamed. I lifted it, took a small sip, and set it down, my voice flat as the river outside. "You can lie to the whole world, Brandon, but kids aren't stupid. One day, Emily will know who stood firm when everything collapsed." Elise broke down then, sobbing loud enough for heads to turn. "Brandon, stop it! What are you doing? You're threatening my father in public?" He snapped at her, voice low but sharp. "Shut up, Elise. I'm talking to him." Those 2 words, "to him," made me realize I wasn't a father anymore, just a witness to my own tragedy. Elise buried her face in her hands while Brandon kept up his act of composure. I stared at him for a long moment, my voice calm but cutting. "You were right about one thing, Brandon. I don't need a family, if that word means humiliation." I rose, picking up my coat. He hissed after me, "You'll regret this. I'll drag the whole court down on you." I turned back and met his eyes. My gaze so cold he flinched slightly. "Good. I'll see you there." I walked out through the murmuring crowd, through the smell of roasted beans and the curious glances following us. When I pushed open the door, the river wind hit my face, cold, sharp, clean. Through the cafe window, I saw Elise still sitting there, hands over her head. Brandon said something, but she didn't hear. She was staring through the glass toward where I was walking, her lips moving silently, but I could read them. "What have we done?" I didn't turn back. The door closed between us like the line dividing past from justice. Inside, I knew, it would be the last time I saw them together as a family. And for the first time, I saw a faint light at the end of the road. 1 week after the confrontation at the cafe, I received a sealed envelope from the Deschutes County Court. The red stamp on the corner read clearly, "Civil complaint, claim for damages." When I opened it, I read each line twice, barely believing my eyes. Brandon Cole, my son-in-law, had filed a countersuit demanding $60,000 for emotional distress and breach of verbal tenancy agreement. I laughed, though no sound came out. The man who had lived in my home for 3 years, eating the meals I cooked, now wanted money because I evicted him from the property that bore my name. I forwarded everything to Liana. She called back moments later. "Professor, this is the kind of desperate counterattack I've seen many times. They think the court will pity them because of the word family, but Oregon doesn't rule on emotion." "I assume you already have a plan?" "Of course," she said firmly. "I'll file a motion to dismiss for lack of legal basis. Underfed, forcible entry and detainer. The lawful owner can reclaim possession without needing to prove any verbal agreement. They won't last 30 minutes in that courtroom." She paused, then added, "The preliminary hearing is next week. Be there. not to defend yourself, but to watch him learn what real justice looks like. That morning, Bend was shrouded in fog. I wore my old suit, the one from when I received my engineering award in 2008, tied my tie carefully, and drove to the Deschutes County Courthouse. Liana was already waiting in the parking lot, file in hand, her stride quick and decisive. "Ready?" she asked. "I was born to build dams against strong currents. Open the gates." The courtroom was small, with only a few rows of benches. Brandon sat across the aisle beside a young lawyer, probably fresh out of law school, hands shaking, shirt wrinkled, his thin folder as flimsy as his client's case. Elise was there too, sitting behind him, unable to meet my eyes. The judge, a stern, middle-aged woman with neatly tied silver hair, glanced at both sides, then tapped her gavel. "Begin." Brandon's lawyer stood first. His voice trembled slightly, but he tried to sound composed. "Your Honor, my client resided at that home under a verbal agreement with Mr. Marin. His sudden actions caused financial and emotional harm to this young family." The judge interrupted. "Do you have proof of this verbal agreement?" We have a witness, Mrs. Elise Marin." She turned to Elise. "Do you have any written evidence?" Elise shook her head softly. "No, Your Honor. We were just staying there." A long pause. Then the judge spoke slowly. "So, no contract, no documents, no evidence of shared ownership. On what basis are you demanding the $60,000? The young attorney looked at Brandon, stammering, "Because of the family relationship." The judge cut in immediately. "This is a courtroom, not a dinner table. Family does not exempt you from legal responsibility." She turned to Liana. "Ms. Ortega?" Liana stood, eyes sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, all taxes, insurance, and maintenance payments are in Mr. Marin's name, under ORS. Section 105.115. The legal owner has the right to reclaim possession without proving intent. The plaintiff provides no written evidence, no measurable damages. We request immediate dismissal." The judge nodded, flipped through a few pages, then said, "Complaint dismissed. No legal grounds. Mr. Marin is confirmed as the lawful owner of the property. Court costs to be paid by the plaintiff." The gavel struck once, short, but echoing through the room like thunder rolling across the lake. I didn't smile, but a great weight lifted from my chest. Elise lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. Brandon rose abruptly, face red, trying to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Liana gathered her files and whispered, 30 minutes, exactly as promised. 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Brandon texted me, "I want to end this peacefully. Let's talk like adults." I read the message, didn't reply, and forwarded it to Liana. She responded with one short line. "Let him think it's a truce. We'll show him what public light looks like." That evening we chose Crystal View Resort, overlooking Lake Bend, the very place Brandon once dreamed of signing new contracts. I asked the restaurant to set a table for 4, myself, Liana, Brandon, and a special guest. Marcus Reed, the investor behind the Sun River Eco Resort project, for which I had guaranteed Brandon a $120,000 contract. Brandon arrived 10 minutes early, dressed as if attending an award dinner, blue suit, red tie, forced confidence. Elise came along, silent, thinner than before. When he saw me, he offered a hand. "Mr. Marin, I'm glad you agreed to meet so we can talk as family." I shook his hand lightly. "Of course. Tonight, we'll talk about everything." Marcus arrived on time, tall, gray-haired, in a light gray suit. Seeing Brandon, he frowned. "Cole, long time. I'm still waiting for that irrigation system at Sun River. It's been 4 months, still nothing." Brandon stammered, smiling weakly. "Yes, there were a few small issues, but I'll have it finished soon." Liana cut in calmly. "Perhaps tonight we'll clear up those small issues." Dinner began. Warm light glowed off the wine glasses, every word polished but sharp. I spoke with Marcus about progress and sustainability designs. Brandon tried to interrupt, bragging about his professional team. Liana stayed silent, smiling now and then, the kind of smile that knows what's coming. When the main course arrived, she set down her glass, opened her purse, and pulled out a small silver USB. Before dessert, I have something to share since it concerns the Sun River project. Marcus turned to her. Concerns me? Yes, and Mr. Cole as well. She nodded to the restaurant technician who switched on the projector. The blank wall lit up with an email header. From Brandon Cole, ACO Landscaping. Subject, collateral confirmation. Liana's voice was clear. This is an email Mr. Cole sent to Pacific Lending Group in February, using the Sun River contract, Mr. Reed's project, as collateral for a $120,000 loan. The problem is this contract was never authorized for collateral, and Mr. Marin's guarantor's signature was scanned and forged. The air froze. Marcus's eyes moved from the screen to Brandon. Brandon shot up. No, I didn't know. Maybe one of my employees... Liana pressed another key. The screen showed Brandon's electronic signature, an exact match. There were no employees, she said softly. And here's your business registration. One operator. Name, Brandon Cole. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, spilling wine. You used my name to borrow money? Do you realize this could get me investigated for a confidentiality breach? Brandon's face drained of color. Marcus, please, let me explain. Don't bother, Marcus said, standing, his voice cutting. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. I'm suing for contract fraud and signature forgery. The whole restaurant turned. Elise covered her mouth, tears streaming as she backed away. I stayed seated, sipping my wine. I invited you here, Brandon, I said slowly, because I believe a man should hear his first sentence with his own ears. Brandon looked around wildly, cornered like an animal. Elise, say something. Your father set me up. She shook her head, trembling. You set yourself up. The staff whispered. Nearby diners stared. Marcus walked out, leaving behind a wine-stained napkin and a line that landed like a stone. You won't work another project in Oregon again. Brandon collapsed into his chair, head in hands. Liana pocketed the USB, her tone gentle as ever. Consider that your public testimony. I stood, left cash for the tip, and leaned close enough for him to hear. You once told me to obey or get out. Now it's your turn. Obey the law or get out of decency. I walked away, leaving him under the amber lights, face pale as ash. Elise stayed behind, not following. She looked through the glass at his hunched reflection, then turned to me, eyes red. I only nodded, no words needed. That night, Hollow Creek Villa wasn't the only thing lit. The truth had just illuminated the whole town. The man who once gave me orders at the dinner table now bowed before both the business world and the wife who once respected him. And I knew justice had finally stepped out of the shadows, carried by the light of a projector. 3 weeks after the dinner at Crystal View Resort, Bend finally cleared of rain. The sky was unnaturally blue, but inside me, the storm had only begun. The summons from the Deschutes County Circuit Court, FED docket, had arrived, setting the official trial date. The case was classified as a property recovery, family dispute, and, as Liana had said, this court would no longer rule by sentiment. That morning I woke early, dressed in a light gray suit and dark blue tie. On my desk lay the notebook packed with evidence, from emails, invoices, and spreadsheets to the property deed. On the last page I had written in bold letters, "Don't seek revenge, restore order." When I arrived at the courthouse, the hallway was packed. Local reporters hovered around, drawn not by me, but by the breaking story of a contractor accused of eco-resort fraud. They didn't know the man in the headlines was my former son-in-law. The courtroom was bright, with white light pouring over the benches. Liana sat beside me, her thick file neatly divided into colored tabs. Property, taxes, contracts, and emails. Every order page, no gap left open. Across the aisle, Brandon sat hunched, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow, stripped of the arrogance of the man who once threw me out of my own home. Elise sat behind him, her face pale. When I glanced her way, she looked down, but in her eyes I caught something new, not defiance, but fear and remorse. The judge entered, Ellen Porter, silver-haired, upright, and known across Portland for her severity. Adjusting her glasses, she read through the file, then looked up. Marin versus Cole. Defense may proceed. Liana rose, her tone calm and firm. Your Honor, we present full documentation proving Mr. Richard Marin as the sole legal owner of the Hollow Creek Villa in Bend, Oregon. All property taxes, insurance, and maintenance fees have been paid by him for over 22 years. More importantly, we have verified email correspondence from Pacific Lending Group showing that the defendant, Brandon Cole, illegally used the Sun River contract, guaranteed under Mr. Marin's name, as collateral for a $120,000 loan. She turned on the projector, displaying the emails, contracts, and notarized confirmations. Each line glowed sharply under the light, and the room fell silent. The judge nodded, turned to Brandon. Mr. Cole, how do you respond? Brandon stood, his voice rough and desperate. I was trying to protect my family. I didn't commit fraud. I was trapped. Mr. Marin set me up. The judge raised an eyebrow. Trapped? Do you have evidence? He froze. Liana immediately rose. Your Honor, here are the original loan documents and full bank statements. Every transfer went directly into Mr. Cole's personal account. Not a cent reached the project. If anyone was trapped, it was the investor, and the father who was humiliated. A few murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand for silence, then turned to me. Mr. Marin, do you have anything to say before the court rules? I stood, my hand resting gently on the folder. Your Honor, I'm not here to evict my daughter or reclaim property. I'm here to reclaim the dignity that someone tried to destroy. If permitted, I request that Elise and my granddaughter Emily be allowed to stay at Hollow Creek until they find a new home. I only ask that Brandon Cole leave. The courtroom went utterly still. The judge studied me, then turned to Elise. Mrs. Marin, the court needs your statement. Will you remain with Mr. Cole, or accept your father's proposal? Elise sat frozen for a moment. I saw her hands tighten together. Then slowly she stood. Tears streamed down her face, her voice shaking but steady. Your Honor, I choose my father. Brandon spun around, shouting, Elise, are you insane? But she didn't look at him, only at me, eyes clear for the first time in years. The judge nodded and read aloud, every word deliberate. Based on the presented evidence, the court declares, Mr. Richard Marin is the sole legal owner of the Hollow Creek Villa. The defendant, Brandon Cole, must vacate the premises within 14 days from today. Mrs. Elise Marin and her child are granted temporary residence under Mr. Marin's supervision. All legal costs and damages shall be borne by the defendant. The gavel struck, one sharp crack, echoing through the room like thunder over still water. Brandon shouted, No, I'll appeal. This is all a setup. 2 court officers stepped forward, ordering him out. He resisted, but was escorted away under dozens of staring eyes, including Elise's, who once nodded as he threw me out. Before leaving, he glared at me, voice strangled with rage. You destroyed my family, I replied evenly, as calm as the lake wind. No, I just cleaned the house you turned into trash. The doors shut behind him. Only Liana, Elise, and I remained. Elise ran to me, sobbing like a child. I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong. I stayed silent when I shouldn't have. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Silence is a sin too, but speaking up redeems it. Liana gathered her files, smiling faintly. Justice just read itself out loud. I looked around the room that once held sneers and pity, now echoing only with the sound of truth. Outside, sunlight poured through the glass, glinting off the brass plaque that read, Deschutes County. In law, we trust. I knew I had walked the full path, from the man humiliated to the man who stood tall and made the world listen to justice's voice. That was the highest form of dignity, when the one who shamed you is led out of court, and your daughter stands beside you in the light. Justice does not shout. It is simply read aloud. 14 days had passed since the verdict. The sky over Bend was impossibly clear that morning, the kind of cold sunlight you only find in the Cascades, where every beam exposes the truth and leaves no room to hide. I arrived early at Hollow Creek Villa with 2 Deschutes County officers assigned to oversee the eviction. They carried clipboards and wore body cameras, their voices calm but absolute. The wooden gate I'd once built by hand was now scratched, its Marin Villa plaque hanging crooked. Brandon had promised to pack up, but I knew this wasn't voluntary. He was being forced out. A rented truck sat by the driveway, its back door open, spilling the smell of stale beer and cardboard boxes. Elise stood on the porch, holding Emily, watching silently. When I approached, Brandon stepped out. He looked hollow, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled, eyes dark from sleepless nights. He forced a bitter smile. "You had to take it this far?" I said nothing, only lifted my phone and hit record. One of the officers spoke evenly, his tone procedural. "This eviction is being documented on camera. Mr. Cole, you have 90 minutes to remove all personal belongings. Any property not under your ownership must remain." Brandon glared, then began gathering his things. I stayed under the porch, filming the entire process. Neighbors began to gather across the fence, the same people who once saw me mowing the lawn, now watching the man who mocked me carry his boxes out. Some nodded, others just stared. Their silence said enough. Brandon kept muttering as he packed. When he came out carrying the heavy tool chest, the professional mower and hedge trimmer I'd bought in Salem back in 2018, I stepped forward, voice calm. "Those aren't yours," he snapped back. "You're really claiming the lawn tools? I've used them for 3 years. Using them doesn't make them yours." The officers checked the photos on my phone, receipts and timestamp pictures from the purchase. One of them said firmly, "Mr. Cole, these items are not on the authorized removal list. Please put them back." Brandon's eyes burned, but he slammed the box down hard, the sound cracking through the yard. Emily flinched and began to cry. Elise held her tight, tears rolling silently. I stayed still. After nearly 2 hours, the truck was sealed, leaving behind a few boxes and a broken man. Brandon turned once more, standing in the middle of the yard where I'd once taught him to plant cherry trees. His voice cracked. "Are you happy now? You got what you wanted." I didn't answer right away. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in bold ink. "You told me to leave. Today it's you who's leaving." I set it on the porch table, right where he used to sit, drinking beer, talking about being the man of the house. Brandon stared at it, lips trembling, but said nothing. One officer stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, your time is up. Please exit the property." He lowered his head and walked slowly toward the gate, never looking back. Elise carried Emily inside while I stood watching the truck roll down the gravel road along the lake. The tires crushed the stones, leaving a faint trail of dust in the sunlight. When it disappeared, I stopped recording and took a long breath. The only sounds left were the wind through the pines and the soft lap of Hollow Creek's water against the shore. I stepped onto the porch, laid my hand on the weathered railing and whispered, "Order restored." There was no joy, no triumph, only silence, thick enough to hear the house breathe again. That night, I sent the video to Liana with one word: completed. Her reply came minutes later. Justice documented perfectly. Justice doesn't need applause or tears. It only needs a single video showing the man who once threw you out now, walking away in silence, carrying shame as his final belonging. 1 month after the eviction, Hollow Creek Villa found its rhythm again. The mornings still carried mist over the lake. The pines still whispered in the wind. But what had changed inside the house Wasn't the furniture, it was the people who remained. Brandon had vanished from town. According to court records, he filed no appeal and left Oregon for Idaho to start over. But in Bend, the echo of the trial and that night at Crystal View still lingered. Elise came to see me one late afternoon. She wore a white blouse, her hair neatly tied, her eyes calm but tired, no longer trembling. She handed me an envelope and spoke softly. I filed for divorce. The court granted me custody of Emily. I've started working at Bend Medical Center as an assistant nursing manager. It's not much, but enough to live. I just want to start again with my daughter. I looked at her, feeling both sorrow and relief. Elise was rebuilding from zero, but this time it was a real zero, not borrowed from anyone's name. I nodded. Starting over isn't shameful. What's shameful is refusing to try. Emily played in the yard with a little rescue dog I'd recently adopted. She stopped by the fence, staring at the rows of wisteria I was replanting along the walkway. "Grandpa, why are you planting so many again?" I smiled. "Because last year someone trampled them, and wisteria deserves to be replanted by kind hands." Elise stood behind me and whispered, "Dad, I understand now. Fences in a garden aren't built to divide, but to protect." That evening, sunlight poured gold over the lake. I sat on the wooden steps, tea steaming in my hand. Emily sat beside me, legs swinging, eyes following a line of ducks gliding past. She was older now, her hair shoulder length, tied with a purple ribbon. "Grandpa, Mommy said we're moving to Bend City next week," she said quietly. "The new place is near the hospital, but far from you." I smiled, brushing her hair. "Not far, just 15 minutes by car. And if you miss me, call me, or send me pictures of the flowers you grow." She turned, eyes shimmering. "But who'll tell me bedtime stories?" I chuckled softly. "Then you tell them to your mom. Tell her there's an old man here who talks to trees, who coaxes wisteria to bloom by saying thank you. And when the wind blows through the hills, that means he's telling the next chapter." She was silent for a moment, then leaned against me and whispered, "I'll miss you so much." I held her close, feeling her small warmth in my arms. "I'll miss you too, sweetheart. But grown-ups sometimes have to let each other go, so everyone has a place to return to. Hollow Creek is home for both of us. The only difference is I'll keep it safe for you." She looked up, eyes glossy. "Then promise you won't get old before I come back, okay?" I laughed, my heart trembling. "I promise. But you must promise too. Whenever you see the wisteria bloom, remember someone here is waiting." She nodded, hooked her pinky finger around mine. A simple promise, but to me, it was the bridge between love and justice, the only thing stronger than this house itself. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt the villa, replaced broken boards, fixed the fence, and repainted the porch. I planted fragrant osmanthus by the steps, so every morning the scent would remind me that wounds can heal if tended with care. Liana still visited often, bringing coffee and a few case files. Many afternoons we sat on the porch, talking about law, about people, and sometimes just watching the lake in silence. Once, when I asked why she chose law, she smiled. "Because some people are too good to defend themselves. I wanted to stand with them." I looked at her, sunlight glinting in her eyes, and understood. Life may take much away, but if you stand for what's right, it always sends the right people back. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "True justice isn't a verdict. It's the moment someone dares to redraw the boundary and then lives peacefully within it." By August, the garden at Hollow Creek was in full bloom. Purple wisteria draped the porch, and osmanthus mingled with the scent of freshly cut pine. Elise helped me hang a swing beneath the old maple. Emily sat on it, laughing like the wind itself. As the sunset washed the lake in amber, Elise turned and said, "Dad, thank you for not staying silent forever." I smiled, my voice low but firm. Silence is wise at times, but when justice needs to be heard, speaking up is courage. She leaned her head on my shoulder while Emily swung, singing some little song about home and love. I looked around. Everything was the same, yet I was finally at peace. No shouting, no shadow of the man who once mocked me. Just a house, a garden, and 3 generations breathing in something pure again, the air of fairness restored. That night, as the breeze stirred the curtains, I wrote the last line in my journal. True justice arrives when one dares to draw new boundaries, not to divide, but to protect what rightfully belongs. And I knew that after 30 years as an environmental engineer, I had finally finished the last project of my life, rebuilding my self-respect. That night, right at the table of the home I built with my own hands, my son-in-law had once pointed at my face and said in front of my daughter, "Do as I say, or get out of this house." And what hurt more than those words was watching my daughter nod. 30 years in engineering taught me about pressure, about limits, about the weight of silence. But not this. Only when my own family threw me out of the house I built did I learn the cruelest thing isn't betrayal itself, but when the betrayer sits beside you. I didn't shout. I just packed my bag and left that night. But what they didn't know, every brick, every paper, every signature in that house still carried my name, and with one well-timed signature, their empire of deceit would collapse under daylight. This isn't the story of an old man thrown into the street. It's the story of a father who turned humiliation into justice, and used silence to teach the world what respect truly means. If you've ever been dismissed by those you loved, if you've ever stayed quiet because you believe justice doesn't need to scream to be heard, leave a single dot in the comments so I'll know you still believe in truth. And subscribe, because I have more stories to tell of those who were pushed to the edge and stood back up, not with fists, but with a document, a verdict, and an unbowed gaze. Autumn returned to Hollow Creek. The lake lay still as glass, reflecting a sky so blue it seemed painted, and the tall pines shedding their leaves in gold. A year had passed since Brandon left. The house still stood firm in the valley, but now it carried a different soul, peaceful, clean, and filled with a child's laughter every weekend. Elise drove up on Saturday wearing a gray sweater, cheeks flushed from the cold. Emily ran ahead, holding a bouquet of purple wisteria she had picked at the hospital where her mother worked. "Here, Grandpa, they planted flowers just like yours at Mom's hospital," she shouted, placing the bouquet on the wooden porch table. I sat in the rocking chair, smiling at the two of them. Elise sat beside me and said quietly, "Dad, I'm getting promoted soon. But what makes me happiest is that whenever a patient asks why I chose this job, I tell them it's because I learned from my father that healing is also a form of justice." I was silent for a moment, then nodded. "You understand now. Justice isn't about revenge. It's so good people can keep living without bowing their heads." We walked through the garden where the new fence was now covered in vines. The air smelled of pine, wood, and damp earth. I stopped by a wooden plaque I had just made, its letters carved deep. Hollow Creek Villa, built by hands, kept by heart. Elise placed her hand on my shoulder while Emily read the words aloud in her small, lisping voice. "Grandpa," she asked, "when you get old, who will keep the house?" I bent down and answered softly, "You will, not with strength, but with memory, by living kindly so no one will ever dare disgrace our family again." She nodded, her smile bright as the lake. I looked out at the water, where the evening sun spilled gold like molten light, and realized that justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. It comes from the way we keep living right, even after being wronged. That night, we had dinner on the porch. Elise told hospital stories, and Emily showed me a drawing of me with wisteria. I poured a glass of wine, watching the lamplight shimmer across the table, and felt something rare. Not the thrill of revenge, but the calm of restored order. I opened my final notebook and wrote, "Justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs someone patient enough to stand firm until truth speaks on its own. And if I leave tomorrow, I know Hollow Creek will remain, proof that once rebuilt, dignity never collapses again. The night wind swept through, wind chimes ringing gently. Emily fell asleep in the chair, and Elise covered her and leaned on my shoulder. Moonlight touched the lake, soft as forgiveness. I closed the notebook, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Thank you for letting me live long enough to see justice bloom." If you've ever been humiliated by your own family, pushed out of the very home you built, remember, justice isn't a scream. It's the moment you reclaim your dignity without asking anyone's permission. Leave a single dot in the comments if you believe true justice doesn't need noise, it only needs to be seen. And if you want to hear more stories of those who were silent until the right time to speak, hit subscribe, because I still have many homes like Hollow Creek where justice waits to be told.